It's a space where I see a lot of people come. They think it's going to be easy. They think they're going to close their first deal, and it takes a long time, and they leave before they accomplish anything. And so I call them a lot of tourists in the space.
Welcome back, investor, to another episode of Passive Income Adventures. Today we've got Amanda Larson. Hello, Amanda.
Great to see you.
Thanks for joining us. You've got an incredible story, but also one that I hear far too often about somebody who's coming from a professional background who is looking at this passive income dream and then realizing that it's a little different than maybe what we were led to believe at the beginning of it. So today I really want to peel back the layers of what working in this industry actually looks like as a GP, like as a general partner versus a limited partner, business owner versus employee, and helping
Mhm.
people kind of identify with your story and figure out like which track they need to be in as an investor. And just talking about before we start recording, we're talking about capital raising, we're talking about the multifamily industry and general commercial industry and just all of the economics and things that go behind running this business. So I'm super excited to hear your perspective on it. I like to peel back the layers while keeping it still positive and uplifting. And so I think this is going to be an interesting conversation today with you. So Amanda, thank you for coming, and just start out by introducing yourself. Tell us where you're from, a little bit about your background, and then we'll dig into it.
Yeah, first, Emma, thank you for having me on the show. It's an honor and a delight to be here. So, I guess just to tell me about myself, go way back. I'm originally from Nebraska, middle of America, middle of nowhere type. Got my undergrad in electrical engineering and always wanted to travel the world. That was just a bug that I had before I even knew it. And I moved to Australia after graduation and ended up working there for a little over 6 years, and as an engineer, I got put on construction sites and moved all over Australia, really, and ended up being there for 6 years and was in I guess, the energy and the mineral and metals space, and experienced my first, I guess, economic cycle, you could say, where everyone was getting laid off, and including myself. So, that was a big not a shift, but a big awakening moment for me. I always thought, "I got a good job, I got a good degree. As long as I'm good at my job and I add value to the company, I would have a job." And that's just simply not the case. And that was my first experience. And being in Australia, what happens when you're not a citizen is you get a free flight home. Back home I go, and then ended up getting another job in Houston, Texas, which is where I am now still. And again, it was market cycles. And so almost immediately we went through another cycle, and I didn't lose my job, but it was still just this really uncomfortable time. You just don't know. You show up every day, you just don't know. And so got through that cycle and went through another cycle and then ended up getting laid off again. And through all this, I started investing. Actually, to back up a little bit, I ended up buying my first property, a single family rental, while I was in Australia. I did that just simply because I grew up in a family that always owned rental properties, and it was just ingrained into me that buy property, get people to pay the rent, it's a good investment. All that said, I really didn't buy into it until much, much later. So I own properties, but I really didn't like the idea of being a landlord. I grew up with my parents being landlords, and it's a lot of work. It's not passive income,
Yeah.
not by any stretch of the imagination. It's a second job. And I looked at it as I have a job, I don't need another job. But something in me always knew that there was more to making money than just working. Like, you somehow had to get your money working for you, otherwise you would be working forever. And I dabbled around in buying stocks and cryptocurrencies a little bit, and there was always just something about real estate that made a little bit more sense. And I read that the purple book that everyone reads, and
Yeah.
it opened my eyes to what real investing is, like buying real assets that put money in your pocket. And I just kept going down that rabbit hole and went to a few seminars and started going to meetups and just getting more involved in the space and learning what other people were doing and learning that there was ways to invest without that landlord second job on top of a job. And Through all this, I bought another house, a single family house, and again, it was a lot of work. It's dealing with tenants, keeping people living there, fixing their problems that are always on the weekends, that are at night. And then I stumbled on multifamily investing. I just ended up going to a local meetup and there was somebody talking about syndications. And that was my aha moment. It was, I mean, I can invest in a property, an apartment complex that cash flows and I don't have to do anything. And I didn't know there was such a thing until I went to this meetup and I heard someone talking about it. And that was the biggest shift. It was like really eye opening. And I didn't figure out why no one was talking about it. But ever since then, I was on board. That was the moment, and I got to know those operators and still know them now and started investing in their deals. It completely changed my perspective on investing. It changed my perspective on owning real estate. Really changed my perspective on how much of a difference it can make and how much of an impact it can make on your own personal life and personal finances. It's just empowering to know, even when you have your job, that you have something else coming in and that you're not completely beholden to your employer. I think it's something that everyone should experience.
Yes. And I don't think that people knew about it because before the Jobs Act of 2012, you
Mhm.
couldn't even talk about this kind of syndication investing publicly. So they basically carved out from the Regulation D the 506B and the 506C, which I know, but the 506C meant you could advertise it, but only accept accredited investors into it. And so all of the advertising kind of blew up from there. And all of a sudden, people were finding out about this because if they had
Mhm.
any interest in real estate, they join a local club just like you did. Same thing that happened to me. And I got in there and I'm like, wait a second. Because I was a convert to commercial real estate very early on before I ever found out about syndication because
Yeah.
my husband grew up in a college town and all of his like potato farmer neighbors would own these little like 14, 25 unit buildings in town that the students would live in. I knew the owners of some of them when I met him. And so to me, it was more in concept that a regular person could own an apartment building, maybe even a large one. I just thought they owned them by themselves or maybe
Yeah.
with a family members, like the joint venture model. And it wasn't until my first commercial purchase actually fell through, a 14 unit,
Mhm.
that when I joined the clubs and they started talking about syndication, I was like, wait, you can buy apartments like you buy stocks? I just give you money and you invest it, and
Yep.
then I collect my money. Like, I don't have to run it. I'm a limited partner, silent partner. And so you and I both had a similar wake up call where we were kind of going down the limited silent partner route. And some people go down that route. Some people like you and me are like, I should do this as a business.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the transition for me was when I put all my money into one big pile. I knew that it wasn't enough to quit my job forever and be retired. So I knew I needed a job, but because I'd given up my business when so you had a job, I didn't because I had a business. And when we
Mhm.
moved across the country, I left it behind. So I was sitting there like, I can invest every dime that I have and it wouldn't be enough to completely retire both me and my husband. He's going to work for another 5 years. I better work for another 5 years so we
Yeah.
can kind of match up our retirement. And so that's what started me into this business. And I don't think most people are like that. I think most people are coming from where you're coming from, where you have another job and you're
Yeah.
contemplating like, do I want to just double down here and keep investing, make more money each year, or do I want to start a business? So take me through your transition into, hey, I might want to actually do this as a partner rather than as a limited partner.
Well, it was just the more I learned about it, the more I liked it, the more I enjoyed it. I really enjoy not enjoy. I find it fascinating the financial side,
Mhm.
learning, digging into the markets, the macroeconomics. For me, it was just more interesting than engineering. And the more I learned, the more I liked it. And then just the idea of owning your own business. I've always had an entrepreneurial spirit. I say I became an engineer because it was the fastest way to escape working because I was like, what can I do that's pays good enough that I could get my money working for me so I could stop working? That was always kind of my plan. I just didn't know what that was going to look like. So when I discovered this and I got to know more about it, I just kept digging deeper. I signed up for a couple mentorship programs, kept learning, but I will say it's not for everyone because it's a lot of work and it takes a lot more tenacity and commitment than people realize. It's a space where I see a lot of people come, they think it's going to be easy, they think they're going to close their first deal, and it takes a long time and they leave before they accomplish anything.
Mhm.
And so I say there's a lot of tourists in the space.
A good way to put it. I've never heard that before, but now that I've been doing this for 6 years,
Mhm.
I can kinda tell who's gonna make it and who's gonna
Yeah,
not make it. The only reason I'm still here, this
yeah.
is so way harder than I thought, is because I literally don't have another career. Like, this is my jam, this is my bag, so I keep going no matter how hard it is.
There's no
But that's
plan
so
B.
like, a tourist, yeah, oh man, I'm gonna steal that. You better trademark it real quick.
Yeah, because a lot of people, you meet them at the whatever events or online, and they've got these audacious big dreams, and I love that. Like, I think
Yeah,
big, and absolutely you should, but it's not easy. It takes a lot more than what people think it's going to, especially right now
yeah.
when experienced operators are having really challenging time and experienced capital raisers are having a hard time. And so most people just get frustrated. Like with a lot of things, if you don't see results within the first couple months, you get frustrated and you leave, you move on. Because quite honestly, it takes most people that I know a couple years to get into their first deal, especially if they're on the acquisition side. I think there's different avenues as capital raising and acquisitions and asset management. And depending on what you really focus on, what size property you're focusing on, you can expedite that path a little bit. But regardless, it takes time and commitment and keep showing up without seeing results right away. And that's why that passive investing opportunity is a really good way to get started for sure and then see what the GP route is really all about before you dive in.
Well, tell me about what that process looks like for you because you do have another lucrative career. Like my daughter's in engineering school right now, and she said the same thing that you said. She's, I just want a job that pays me as much as possible with my
Mhm.
aptitude so
Yeah,
that I can buy rental properties and work
yeah.
on becoming financially free. Now, retirement, maybe not the word for her because she's only 25, but to be
Yeah.
able to say, like, I want to become job optional as young as possible so that I can find my
Yeah.
true purpose, my deeper meaning, all that. So
Yeah.
I'm familiar with this, but when it gets hard, and I have not told any of my kids except for one to go into capital raising as a business. I've told them all like buy yourself like 5 or 10 rental houses and
Yeah.
recycle every 10 years. Like real estate investing for dummies, more like the Kathy Fettke version. It's like retire
Mhm.
rich on rental, her book. Like that's kind of something that anybody can do. And I even tell my own investors, that's not a bad idea to just go out like you did, get a couple of your own rental houses, maybe 5 to 10 rental houses, and just
Mhm.
keep those up, upgrade them for newer, nicer ones as often as you possibly can. And then you start investing in other
Yeah.
stuff if you want to have faster results. One kid, she really loves sales. And that's why I told her, I was like, you might actually want to go into capital raising as a business because as much as I hate calling it sales, a lot of the same skills cross over. So in your case, you've got this other career, another thing that find the real estate more interesting, but sometimes it's just because it's new. And when it gets old and it gets hard, how do you keep yourself going and how do you balance the dual career thing?
Well, I will say about a year ago, I became a full-time real estate investor.
Nice. Like balance is not for
So
me.
the decision was made for it was another cycle,
Oh,
and
wow.
yeah, so that was always kind of the plan. I was always working on it in the background, but the timing was probably not entirely up to me, but it is what it is, and I'm grateful that I have other streams of income that I can fall back on. Otherwise, it would have been a much different experience.
Yes.
And
Another layoff. One more layoff, right?
and I can
Yeah.
difference between what it feels like when you have those streams of income versus when you don't is a completely different experience. It's never fun, but it's not as frightening when you have something else to work with.
Well, how did you handle it during the years when you were balancing both careers? Like, take us back in time a little bit more to before when you were balancing both and some of
Yeah.
the satisfaction you were getting out of it. Because I'm sure it is a great feeling to close a property, rent a property, make money for your investors. Yet it's also extremely stressful and time consuming. So take me through that. It's a very high and low type of career. I would love to hear more about how you balance that, and then kind of catch us up to the present day and how you're doing
Yeah.
this full time.
Yeah, balancing is I mean, you just do everything you can. I was the work during the day, come home. During COVID, I was working from home, so it was a little bit different. But it's really just almost 2 full-time jobs. I would come home after work and I would underwrite, analyze, pull up OMs, pull up financials, and just searching for deals. And then also on the side, try to network, go to meetups. It was it's 2 full-time jobs. It was not something that most people would do unless they really, really wanted to, because it's a second job. It's takes a lot of time. I think I couldn't pull up the numbers, but you underwrite. I don't know if people realize how many deals are analyzed before you even make an offer. I look at 100 deals, I might make 1 offer. And then it's an offer process. It's not like buying a single family house. There's a process that you follow or that the brokers have you follow. You make your offer and then you make a better offer. It's the best and final round, and then you're interviewed and you're expected to raise your offer again. So it's a process. It took me 2 years before I got to my first deal as a GP. So it's a long time. And all that time is also working probably 30 to 40 hours on top of my W-2 job, trying to work things out.
Yeah, you really gotta love it, and that's one thing I like you said before, is you found it interesting, you found it fascinating. For the tourists are the people who think, "Oh, this is gonna be a lot of money, it's gonna be fast money, it's gonna be easy money," and even though if you ask any one of us if it's gonna be fast or easy money, we all would say no,
Yeah,
but we all thought it would be faster and easier than it actually is, and that's the key that you brought in. You have to love the underlying business, you have to love the underlying product, you have to love the underlying process,
yeah.
and that's the difference right there. So, when you got laid off oh, sorry.
It
Go
didn't seem
ahead.
like work. Like, people would say, "You're spending all this time," and it is like a second job, but it didn't feel like work to me. It was I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed learning each time I would underwrite something and working with coaches and learning about how different markets are different during different economic cycles and what to look for. So it didn't feel like work, but it's time consuming. So for a lot of people, it's gonna feel like work.
That's true because you gotta love what you're doing in order to spend that much time at it and do a good job at it. So, I wanna hear about your first deal, what your role was in that, and then tell me kinda like when you shifted to that realization, like, everybody gotta raise capital. Because in my situation, when I found my first deal, my partner, his grandfather is a famous billionaire. So I honestly thought when he told me, he's like, "I can raise all this money by myself." I'm like, "If anybody's got a network,"
Yeah.
I've got a network. And it was still hard. We had to raise less, like right around $1,000,000, just under $1,000,000. And it was bringing in another partner, joint venture, bringing money. It was like pulling teeth. The network, because we didn't know what we were doing and we were new. And of course, his network all knew exactly
Yeah.
where we were. So people who invested with us were people that believed in him and believed in his ability to do things, not because he'd actually done it, because they'd known him for a very long time. And in my case, it was the same. It was people like, "I like what you guys are building over here. Let me throw some money at it." So it was very, very difficult to find enough people who
Yeah.
felt like that in order to work with us and trust us. So I remember when he was like, "We all gotta pitch in here. We all gotta raise capital together." And I was like, "But you said you gonna have to raise any capital," because I'm kind of a sales position and I didn't feel like I had a network. Whereas you came into it saying you felt like you had a pretty good network in order to be able to go out and raise the capital. And then you have that moment where you're like, okay, just because I have a good network of people who make good money doesn't mean that they want to invest in this and maybe not with me. So walk me through that, what you did in your very first deal, and then coming around to being like, it doesn't matter what you do, acquisitions, underwriting, asset management, whatever.
Uh-huh.
Everybody on this team is raising capital
Right,
together.
so, ironically, as much as I almost thought that raising capital wasn't my thing, I got in my first deal to help raise capital and asset manage and do all the things that a GP does, but really they needed help. They needed help raising capital, and people said, "Just go raise what you can and get into your first deal," because again, at the time, once you get your first deal done, everything gets easier after that. Well, this was at the end of it was September 2022, I think it was. And I was like, "Yeah, I can probably raise X amount." And I thought I was being conservative, but raising capital is so for me, and I think a lot of people, it's so much harder than what people think. Just because you have a network of high income earners who you would think presumably would want passive income, not have to do anything. I was sold on it right away. Like, I just thought it was the best thing since sliced bread. So I it was hard to understand why no one else would be interested in it, but simply a lot of people just are not interested. They hear a little bit about it and they say, "That's fine, not interested." And so I raised a little bit, not as much as I thought I would, with pretty low expectations. It was harder than what I thought. And that was another eye-opening experience where, okay, I really need, even if I'm not gonna be the big capital raiser, I really need to start getting better at this, putting some systems behind it, and focusing more time and effort on this idea. Because you're gonna have to do it. Every deal, everyone has to jump in, especially right now. A lot of deals just start not getting over the line because they don't have the equity. Like it
Yep.
either falls apart or they're scrambling, they're adding more GPs. Right now, it's challenging. So,
Yep. Yep. Uh,
again,
we made a major pivot about a year and a half ago when we first put together our investing thesis for our fund because for a
yeah,
long time I'm like I need a fund because I need to bring in some partners. We need to be able to feed more than just me and people to share the work cuz the thought leadership platform that we all hear a lot about in capital raising and I've done several different capital raising coaches now, probably will always have a coach,
yeah,
but they all say the same thing. Get a podcast, get a social media presence, get a YouTube channel, write a newsletter, write a blog, whatever. You got to put yourself out there, email marketing, all of that. And then that's where it ends. And it's supposed to be all these inbound leads from people who see your thought leadership platform and then they reach out and say, hey, tell me about your deals. People who do that are like godsends because they're ready, they're prepared, and they want to talk deals and they want to get into it. But more of it, it's a lot more outbound. I think that's why it's harder. It's so much more outbound
yeah.
than I thought it was going to be. And so when things in multifamily and commercial real estate were getting a little rocky, still
Mhm.
love, will always have some in my portfolio. I will manage all it's like, I think it's great, right? But I was like, I personally was doing better with lending and debt lending at that point in my portfolio, like selling houses on seller financing, hard money loans, things like that. And so we decided to go that direction because people were nervous, very nervous. And so there was this capital flight from people who were nervous about what was going on in the economy, the boomers retiring and investing in like boring stuff, right? And the Gen Xers, I think, were one up. I think we're the smallest generation. I think maybe the Gen Zers are a little smaller, but like we're a small generation. And when we enter our 40s and 50s, we're carrying the burden of the entire private capital market on our backs, those 40 to 50-year-olds. And there just aren't as many of us as there were boomers in their 40s and 50s. So we're seeing this capital flight at the same demographically at the same time we're seeing a downturn in the economy because these interest rates, the loans are no good
Mhm.
and a lot of them are coming due and there's just a lot of confusion. So we definitely made a pivot in our plan and it's still hard raising money. So
Yeah,
let's talk about what you're doing now because like you said, you're not gonna start a fund and become like capital raiser extraordinaire, right? But that
yeah.
is the easiest way to get into your first deal is to bring in a chunk of money, whether it's yours in a joint venture or you can go raise a bunch of money. So for people who are frustrated at finding their first deal, they turn to capital raising to get into that first deal and discover, as you and I both did, it's
Yeah.
rough, rough. So let's talk about what's going on in capital markets today from your point of view and your experience.
So I haven't raised for a deal for a while, but to your point, I've joined another mentorship program to help me because social media and marketing and doing all this is so far out of my wheelhouse as an engineer. Like it's just not who I am. I'm not wired to do this. I'm not wired to be on podcasts or posting on different social media platforms, but it's absolutely necessary to put yourself out there and allow people to get to know you, which again is not what I'm wired to do. It's more for me with like people just want to know about the deal, but they I'm learning more and more that they really want to know who they're investing with and they want to get to know
Yeah.
you. I'm building that system. I think Emma, we met on LinkedIn. I've been more active on LinkedIn in the last short while than I ever have been. I always thought it was a place where you go find a job, but I'm learning it's a real network, a real community. Getting the newsletters out there, getting the website built. And these are all things that when I joined the space, a lot of people just weren't doing. The targets they keep moving, but how you get to the end path or the end goal is changing dramatically. It takes a lot more work, a lot more professionalism, and again, more tenacity than I think it used to.
Mhm. I was talking to somebody at a conference recently. I went to a conference for fund managers, so specifically for people who are raising capital.
Okay.
Most of us were in there for real estate, but
Yeah.
it was broad. We're in Dallas. Maybe you were there. We missed each other.
I heard that there was one recently in Florida, but I didn't know about the one in Dallas. We should connect and we can tell me about these.
Definitely. And I was talking to some of the people who've had great success raising capital over the last couple of years, and they were giving me real numbers. Like I've raised over the last 3 years, I've raised 13 million. Over the last years, I've raised 7 million or whatever.
Yeah,
Cause a lot of people, like if you and I did a deal together and we had to raise, say, $5 million for it. Now you could say you raised 5 million and I can say I raised 5 million. I'm like, that's not how it actually is. It's like saying I have 1,000 doors. I'm like, really? If you calculate my ownership of those doors, I have like 12, right? So just being able to be real, like how much money have you raised? And then I asked them, "How much money did you spend on that raise?" And I was shocked. Hundreds of thousands of dollars of marketing and advertising, getting their
very, very
systems built up. It was shocking. But the thing that really got me, other than how much money they spent, because if you're starting a real business, we're dealing with this many zeros. It's like, that's the cost of doing business, right? But then he said, "It doesn't matter how automated you are. It doesn't matter, how much inbound you have, how good your
mhm,
marketing is." He says, "You will never escape having conversations with humans on the phone." He goes, "All this is on the front end is
yeah,
just to get the inbound leads, and after that, it goes old school. You gotta be able to have relationships, talk to people, follow up, meet in person, have great investor service, all of that." And I thought he goes, "It's changing on the front end, but the back end is still old school." So have you been, because you said it's been a little while since you've gotten out there, because the deals, they're a little thin right now. What are you seeing as you're gearing up to do your next cap raise and you're kind of getting all these things in
yeah,
place?
place.
What changes and what never changes?
Right now, it's really getting if people have invested before, they're scared. A lot
Yes.
of people that are passive investors right now have deals that at best are not distributing, or a lot of them have had capital calls. I don't wanna say a lot, but people have lost their equity in deals, and it's getting them unfearful. So I think that's
Mhm.
one bucket of people. And then the new bucket, like people who have never invested before, I think it's still that you have to bring them along the educational space. Most people have never heard about this. You have to first make them aware that this opportunity exists and then get them comfortable. So you're dealing with two separate challenges with two different types of investors. And I don't think either one is easier right now. You would generally, beforehand, getting somebody who's already invested passively was an easier lift. But right now, it's people are scared, and
Mhm.
rightfully so, because their deals have not gone as expected for many of them. That said, I think some of the more sophisticated investors who have been in the space longer just simply understand that there are market cycles and things sometimes don't go as planned, but that doesn't make it a bad investment.
Well said. And when as we've been reaching out to more institutional investors, occasionally we'll have like a family office or somebody who owns like 20 Burger Kings or somebody like that, right? We'll reach out and say, "Hey, like I want to invest in what you guys are doing. I have $5 million I need to place over the next whatever, or $10 million."
Yeah.
And I'm like, I cannot put that kind of money to use right now. And one thing I've heard again and again, all they care about is track record. Again and again and again and again. I spend a lot of time talking about other stuff, and I
Yeah.
don't really spend as much time talking about my track record, like what I've done, what we've accomplished, the challenges that we've had, and how we overcome those. But the larger check writers, because everybody thinks, "Oh, I'm just going to go institutional capital." Institutional capital, that pursuit, they are only investing in people who have been together for a very long time, who've had multiple full cycle deals. Like if you go to the Institutional Limited Partner Association, they have a questionnaire. It's like 5 pages long or something. And it's all stuff about, do you have another job? Like, like, have you ever declared bankruptcy? Like these kind of questions. And so that track record becomes more and more important as institutional investors are doing this, because they've been able to do this all along. They
Mhm.
didn't need ad or solicitation to know this was a thing. So that track record becomes more and more important. And as people are kind of getting wind of what's going on, they're starting to look a lot at the track record. So what do you think about the deals that are not performing? Like you said, capital calls, loss of capital. I don't know very many that have foreclosed. I know a few more that have lost all the capital because they had to basically short sale.
Yeah.
And a few more that they're not paying distributions. And then the ones that are paying distributions are kind of downgrading their projections. I know very few who are performing as planned. Like,
Mhm.
even if they're not losing their capital, they're certainly not making those 15%, 20% returns like they were.
Yeah.
So, what are you seeing in this downturn? I personally think most of the operators, like you said, experienced operators caught in a market cycle are going to get a little bit of a pass, because there are things that are out of people's control. How do you separate incompetence from just what's going on in the market?
Yeah, that's I've actually thought about this a lot, Emma, because before you could ask about track record and you'd say, people to give their track record and how many full cycle deals, what were the returns like, what was the timeline like. But now I think you really it's going to be challenging to disentangle what was poor operations versus what was out of their control. And
Mm,
because there are some things that when you're in the business of buying apartments or buying real estate, you hindsight is worth a lot, but you don't know you're at the top until you're past the top. And when you're told that interest rates are not gonna go up and they do, and you take on bridge debt because even the smartest people in the room are taking on bridge debt, and you put a rate cap on it just good. But then interest rates still stay up and insurance doubles and property taxes are out of control. Some things are in their control, but some things simply aren't. And so disentangling what was in their control and what was not in their control, I think is going to be a challenge for limited partners. You're gonna have to know the operator even better than you did before and just really trust that they can solve problems, that they know what's going on, that they're doing everything that they can, and they're not just buying for the sake of buying. Relationships, it all comes back down to relationships and
mhm.
how much trust you could put in that general partner.
Difference in the way that people are investing and the way that they are talking. And what I'm finding myself struggling with, and I would love to hear your point of view on this, is it's not really sales, like I said, but a lot of the same skills, a lot of the same marketing and all of that apply. But then I feel like this stuff has changed my life in a relatively short period of time, right?
Yeah.
This stuff has changed my life. And I want to get that message out there and help people and like provide people with opportunities that have really been beneficial to us, both in the
Mhm.
multifamily space, the private lending space, it just helping people figure this out. But it's like if people don't want it because they're scared, if I'm having to, like, talk people into it and convince them,
Yeah.
which I never do, so you're just kind of prepared to take that slowdown of being able to raise
Mhm.
capital because 'cause I'm like, "This is a big deal. This is a big decision, right? If I have to talk you
Yeah.
into it, that's not the kind of nervous I don't do nervous investors, right? So how do
Want
you
yeah.
feel about that? You're basically offering this opportunity, but then you
Mhm.
feel maybe I almost feel, like, a little guilty about it sometimes, like, if you don't want to do this, it's not for everyone, right? But
Yeah.
yet at the same time, I feel like there's so many people out there who don't know it's a thing or haven't done it. I'm like, I know we can change lives. And so I find myself going back and forth. So have you ever thought about that before? And if so, how do you manage that?
I'm probably more like you. I cannot do the hard sell. Like, if people get uncomfortable or they're unsure or they're uncertain, that's money that maybe they need more time. Maybe they'll just not be a passive investor. Because what I see a lot is they want to invest. They're talking to you. They understand the idea that it's important for them to be investing, but maybe they don't like not being in control. So maybe the single family route is best for them because they can control their money, they can control the asset. Maybe that's the best route, and sometimes they just need more time. They need to get to know you more, they need to know how that deal is doing. Like, I have people that have passed on previous deals, but now they're asking, "Hey, how's that going?" One of the deals I closed on last year, a little over a year ago, we are distributing. It is going well. We ended up with fixed rate debt, good insurance, and so that is going well, so they're becoming more comfortable, and so it's just there are a few buckets where people fall. Some people just need more time, get more comfortable. But taking nervous money, I think, is generally just a not a good idea because that's going to be the first person when things don't go as planned. They're going to be even more nervous and they're going to be asking and asking and asking. And they're going to be that investor that maybe just should have waited a little bit longer because no matter what, things don't always go as planned. You're dealing with people over periods of 3 to 5 to 7 year hold. Like you're never gonna meet your pro forma. It's either gonna be a little bit better or a little bit worse. Never pro
Yeah.
forma is looking into the future, and some people just don't quite understand that. Like, the returns aren't guaranteed, they're just projections, and a lot of GPs will tell you anything you wanna hear when it comes to projection.
When we first partnered, his day job was underwriting basically hard money loans for a large fund. And he would look at deals all day long. He said the same thing. He said, I have seen zero deals that I have ever underwritten perform according to the projections that I made. Zero. He goes, they're all either better or worse. Some of them come in pretty close, but
Mhm.
never once has one come in right on. I think that was an eye opener for me that these are projections, but as a pitch deck designer for syndicators attracting investor capital, some of my clients, they really want the sizzle. And maybe I'm
Yeah.
not the best fit at the point because I'm like, this pitch deck is what your investors are going to go back to again and again. And the pitch deck actually goes in the legal disclosures. Like it becomes exhibit
Yeah.
in the legal disclosures. They're going to come back to this again and again to see what you promised. Now, even if the SEC, it's all fine, it's regulatory fine. Your investor relations or your customer service is going to come back to what you told them in the beginning and
Yep.
asserted in the pitch deck and in your disclosures that this is what's going to happen. So how do you balance the realistic expectations with the dreamy possibilities? Because they're both there every single time that we do a deal.
Well, I think I mean, this term is overused all the time, but being conservative and taking
Yeah.
not the worst case, because if you take the worst case scenario, you're probably never gonna get it. Like,
Yeah,
you
nuclear war.
but you do have to be realistic, and you have to rely on the to some extent, rely on the data. There is data out there about projections on rent growth and how the economy is doing, and always keep your finger on the pulse of how the economy is doing and dig into the rent rolls and the financial statements because you can hear all day long that, for example, this property is you can raise rents by $300 if you just change the countertops or something. Well, maybe, but, if it were that simple, don't you think the owner would have done it already? Or
Right.
you can only do so much in certain markets and just being realistic with what your projections are. And if an investor is trying to decide between different opportunities that are maybe 16% IRR versus a 17% IRR, it's probably not worth chasing because really it comes down to the operator and you can put as much sizzle in that pitch deck as you want, but you're still working with economic cycles and submarkets and people.
That's one reason I really like sensitivity tables in
Yeah.
pitch decks and spreadsheets because you can be like, okay, if the IRR does this or the rent comps do that, and you
Yeah.
can kind of put them on sliding scales. So I've my favorite decks back when I was learning how to design these were the ones that would have like a couple of different sensitivity tables
Yeah.
so that you could say like, here's best case, here's worst case. We're probably going to fall somewhere in the middle. It kind of gives you a more realistic expectation of what's going to happen. And so as a financial modeler, underwriter,
Mhm.
you're the numbers person. What
Mhm.
kinds of things do you feel like the average limited partner investor, which is an institutional guys, they've been doing this all day long, right? But for a more sophisticated investor, even if they're accredited, like what are some of the big red flags that you're like, if the underwriting says this, or that, run. Or come here, we actually are conservative.
The biggest one is the reversion cap rate. You can move that reversion cap rate around and just adjust it. Not a lot, but it'll make a big difference in the returns. That's the biggest mover. Again, the reversion cap rate is hard. Everyone is just trying to project into the future. You can make an argument that reversion cap rates are going to go up. You can make an argument that they're going to go down. You just need to
Mhm.
see sensitivity that if they do or don't do how the deal's underwritten, what's going to happen. So that's the biggest one, and then I would say things like rent growth and expense growth and what the deal is relying on. If the deal is relying on suddenly adding all this other income between parking stalls and washer and dryers and granite countertops, or that's the value add, but other income like pet rent or something. It's too reliant on those small things. It's probably not robust enough, and the underwriting is not conservative enough. And then beyond that, I would say the submarket. You really need to know where the property is located and what's realistic for that little pocket. Because anyone can tell you that a property is located in a certain area of town, but demographics and what properties can do can change so fast, especially I'm in Houston and the pockets are so small that you can go 2 blocks down and a completely different neighborhood, a completely different renter population. And so knowing exactly what your renter is going to look like and what they can afford realistically, what do they do as a what's the income in that area and can they afford a rent increase of 100 or 200 or $300? Because that's where I see a lot of things go a little bit unrealistic is you're working with a population that realistically can't even afford those projections. And so, but a lot of it comes back to knowing the GP. If you know the GP and trust the GP and trust that they can solve problems, a lot of that's taken care of. The limited partner, you can't be the expert at everything.
Yep. I mean, institutional investors have a team to go and nitpick over your underwriting and the Typical LP does not, but seeing inside the shops of institutional capital raisers, they don't ask near as many questions. Honestly, like it's shocking how
Yeah.
few questions they ask because they're all about track record and they assume that that sources and uses should be the same. Like they assume that these things if you have such and such of a track record. And so for LPs that feel a little bit intimidated by digging into the spreadsheet and not understanding like, oh, they were way off on property taxes or something that can throw or a loan, like the loan had yield maintenance and they don't know what that is, right? If you are less sophisticated or it's your first investment, just go with someone who's done this a lot of times. All of our investors on our first deal were more experienced than we were, and they were willing to take that risk on us. But taking on like a beginner who'd never done this before, like that's not that. First of all, that wasn't gonna happen, that's not our style, but none of
Mhm.
the beginners were interested, right? Because they
Yeah.
knew that we were new. So, to me, like, that's a big one, is the track record is more important, and that can give you some peace of mind if you
Mhm.
don't know how to get into the spreadsheet. Because not even the institutional guys do that. Some
Yeah.
of them will have their $50 an hour guy review it. I have
Maybe.
seen that. The decision makers are not
Yeah.
diving in level of detail.
And I think what a lot of LPs do, and I suggest this to a lot of people, if they're thinking about investing with a certain group or a certain operator, go ask other LPs that have invested with that operator what the experience was like. Were they transparent? Did they communicate? How are they treated? What were the results really like? And a lot of times you'll get a pretty decent idea of how things really are in reality because the operator's not going to tell you. One other thing I would say is for me, when I look at operators, how willing are they to really do everything they can to make the deal go well? Even when things don't go as planned, if the economy falls apart, or how committed are they to put everything that they have, their time, their effort, to doing everything they can to protect the investment money? Because that could go a long way.
Yeah, the stories of people who live near their properties, who have liquidity. I mean, in public markets, they have
Mhm.
something called the acid test, which basically has anybody ever heard about that in a
Mhm.
private placement? So knowing what their liquidity is, so can they bail something out if it needs a little bit of extra injection? Most deals I've been on, maybe every deal I've been on, I'd have to go back and think about it. But I think every deal where I've been a partner, whether managing partner or just like a small part of the GP, has had a GP capital call. And
Right.
that's an eye opener to me. It's like, this property needs an injection. Who on the team can do this? Establishing that beforehand, most people don't do. But now,
Mhm.
as a partner myself, I am asking that question like, who's the liquidity partner? Because I guarantee it's not the guy signing on the loan.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
just wants to get his equity for signing on the loan, and he's showing liquidity and he's showing net worth to the lender.
Mhm.
But does he plan to ever use that to save this deal, to inject this deal? And I want to know who it is. I also
Mhm.
want to know who you are. Who's managing these finances?
Yeah.
Like, who's the one looking over this stuff and making the decisions day to day that makes sure there's enough money to do what needs to get done? Like, and a lot of people don't even have that person on the team because they brought in so many capital raisers
Yeah.
that in
Yeah.
charge of actually running the ship. So
Who's
what does your role look like there?
When I see you look at different groups and you want to know what everyone is doing, because I've seen groups where I think, okay, there's a number of people here, but what I know of them, none of them really have their finger on the pulse in terms of operations or
Yep.
asset management. Like it really takes a personality that can stick around and not be attracted by the next shiny object because you're in this deal for 5 years and you've got to stay on top of things and people can get bored after 5 years. You don't want that. It's
Yep. That's one of the things I like about raising capital for other people. Our last equity deal that we did was our fund, like we bought it. Like it's our deal, we're the managing partners on it. But I
yeah.
also like raising money for other people that I know are better operators than me
Yeah.
because I know their track record. And there was a point in time before I put the fund together when I was really burning out and I was doubting myself. And I'm like, I don't know if I can do this. And I was raising capital for a deal. And I had this horrifying thought of, I don't want to run this deal. Like, I really don't want to run this deal. And if
Yeah.
I don't want to run this deal, why on earth am I taking money? Right? So I had to have a heart to heart with the partners and be like, here's what I'm capable of. Here's what I know I can do. And here's what I know will happen. I need one of y'all to step up at a certain point and take over as managing partner at
Mhm.
refinance. I will get this to refinance. Oh, that was just like a breath of fresh air. And I felt so much better about
Yeah.
being able to raise capital because I'm a serial starter I'm
Yeah.
not the operator or the integrator personality
Right.
who's just gonna keep this thing going for 5 years. So I made sure we had that person on the team who had their every detail on the finances, all of that, right? And she actually said to me like a year or so ago, I had a question about something and she was, I was kind of the impression you just wanted your distribution check on this one. I like still want to be like involved in the decision, right? And I was like, oh, well, maybe I oversold that a little bit too much. But are you more of that integrator operator style when you're in a deal, or what's typically your role to play inside of the group? Obviously, everybody needs to be raising capital, but once the capital is raised, where do you settle in?
Yeah, and everyone also needs to have some finger on the pulse and part of asset management and paying attention. Because if you I think it's important, particularly for capital raisers, to keep an eye on the deal and see how it's operating because they are stewards of capital. But, like, on my most recent deal in Houston, I partnered with a larger equity group based in Houston. It's actually the group that got me started in commercial real estate, and they are taking most of the asset management role and operations role, and I'm helping and learning as much as I can because they operate just like a well-run ship, and so I'm just there learning and taking notes so I can do that, be that person in the future.
Yeah, bring us into the future, bring us into your future. Where do you see yourself going, first of all, in your business? Growth projections, what type of business do you want to have? I raised capital for our own hard money loans that we're the GPs on those for our own like, venture deals, but I also raise equity for other teams. Like that's where our business is going. Will I ever buy another multifamily where I'm the managing partner? Probably. The 5 to 7 year commit, I wanna hook people up with great operators who do not have one foot in the passive income adventure door like I do, right?
Really?
And like my investors do. I'm looking for people who are scaling this business and they plan to do it for 25 years beyond. And so that's my message to my investors is like, we will partner you up with great people, just the way institutional capital raisers do. But are we gonna be the ones running it? Probably not. So tell me a little bit about what your business looks like over the next 5-ish years, ten years. And also tell me about like your own passive income adventure journey. Like what is on your bucket list? Like what are you working towards? What keeps you going? Are you one of those I'm never going to retire or at a certain age I recognize I probably will need to slow down? Tell me about what that looks like in your world.
So we'll take the first one. So what I'm trying to grow as a business is I'm really trying to grow, be an operator and an asset manager and gain that experience and be that person who people bring their investors to. That's what I enjoy. I like getting into those details and holding on to it and seeing what the value add does and operating the property and making those returns for the investors. So that's where I'm going and really trying to scale. And then on the side, also learning that capital raising piece because it's so important. So I'm still finding my way in this, but that's the vision and the goal is to really grow a business out of this, like a well oiled machine that I can be that GP that people want to go to. And in terms of, I think the other one was, what do I see as why do I do this? Ultimately, 'cause I can plot my own path. I'm not tied or beholden to I don't wanna say beholden, 'cause I did like my job, but having options on what I wanna do and where you wanna live and where you wanna invest is really important to me, and I love to travel, and just having not the time to travel on my own terms.
Mhm.
We spoke about earlier, this is a pretty intense role, and you don't always have the time. I probably work more hours than I used to, but having that flexibility with my time is really important to me.
Where are you planning on going? What's on your vacation bucket list?
Oh, I would love to go back to Europe. Last year I was in Turkey, and I would love to go back and do a little bit more of that. And more Eastern Europe is definitely on the list. Thailand, Vietnam. I was in Thailand a while back, but I want to go back, do it more thoroughly. And then, yeah, I don't know. I'm more of an opportunistic traveler. I'm kind of open up the Google Maps and
Yeah.
I like it where it looks interesting, but definitely kind of that. I definitely want to get back to Turkey.
Yeah. Are you one of those people who, like, does those flight watches where you see a cheap flight, you're like, "That's where I'm going."
Yeah, yeah. Yep, look me. And looks like we're leaving next week. So yeah.
Yep, yep.
Yeah.
Pack your bags. You're one of the people who has your passport renewal in your calendar to pop up 3 months in advance, 10 years down the road because 'cause you're like, "I can never be without a passport because a flight might come up. I need to be ready."
Thought,
Yeah.
I'll just say maybe something this summer and I'll just explore like when can I go and where can I go for, whatever's on special.
Yep.
There's always an adventure.
Yes. One of my you're gonna think this is unrelated, but it's coming around. Earliest memory as a kid was where my mom was taking us around to different fast food restaurants, and we would go in, and then she gave us the money or whatever we needed, but my older sister was kinda running the program, I was too young, and we'd come out, and one we had a bunch of hamburgers, and the next one we go and get a bunch of french fries, and the next one we went and got a bunch of ice creams and little pies or whatever. I realized later she was couponing. She had been
Yeah.
collecting these coupons, they were about to expire, and it was a coupon scavenger hunt is basically what it was, and so I ate I hate to say this, I hate fast food, and so some of those restaurants that we ate at that night is the only time I've ever eaten at that fast food restaurant in my entire life. I'm gonna say, and I never would have done it if we hadn't been doing the coupon scavenger hunt, so I just kinda remember that a lot and just be like, sometimes opportunities are there, and we just have to be open up to letting life happen to us sometimes because we're so driven and so focused. We're all like, we happen to life, right? But just allowing life to happen to us sometimes, it's a beautiful message.
Yeah. And having an idea of where you want to go, but I don't really have what's next because I just don't know what's next. I think I end up going to Mexico quite a bit just because for me, it's right there. I can get there in a couple hours and you can fly from Houston. Central America, I've been a few times. So you just never know where life is going to take you. And I think that's part of the adventure.
Yeah, and unless you're like the boots on the ground for a property, you can work remote. Even if you are boots on the ground, as long as like nothing blows up and somebody's there for take care of any fires or floods. This job is mostly remote, and that's one thing I really like about it.
And if you're away, the one good thing, and it's brilliant. Somebody said this to me a couple years ago. I was planning a trip and we were working on, I think we were had offers in on a deal. And I was like, I'm going to be away. Is that okay? And they're like, you're with a team. The whole idea is you're with a team. And when you have something going on, we're here to back you up. And we'll all have something going on at some point. So that's what you're for.
When we were closing my very first deal ever, my 18-year-old son was diagnosed with autism, and then right after that, my dad passed away, and so I was really struggling. I had to be out of
Mm.
town quite a bit for my dad, and I was at a lot of doctor appointments for my son, just kind of figuring out, like, what services we can help him with, and also just very depressed. But because it was my first deal, my 2 team members really stood up and said, "You do what you need to do, family first, person first, we got this." And that was a huge comfort to me early on. And so now I think that taught me for the first time, this is the first time I'd ever done a business with somebody else, that we're a team and we went into this business because we trust one another. And they really grew during that time.
Yeah. One more, I guess, benefit of being in the space is what I find is there's really good people to work with. I mean, not everyone, but
I a
more often
lot.
than not, a lot of really good people who just we're all trying to accomplish the same or similar goals.
Yeah, it's very collaborative. I know that I had a friend of mine, his uncle was one of the original gurus, and it was very competitive because everybody was competing for the same single family houses back in the 80s, late night Carlton Sheets commercials, and it was a little bit cutthroat. And I think in wholesaling and single families, it still can be kind of like that.
Yeah.
But in commercial and syndication, your network is your net worth, and it's much, much more collaborative. And I've really enjoyed that atmosphere of accomplishment, achievement, and also
Mhm.
personal development that has to happen to do the things that we're doing. It's really been enjoyable to meet people where they are and then go places together. You probably found the same thing.
Yeah, I think it's you learn from each other because most of us are out here. There's not you can join mentorship programs, you can watch YouTube videos, but a lot of it is learning from each other or
Yeah.
learning by doing. And so there's not a course, there's not you don't go get your degree. Most of us don't go get a degree in real estate. And even if you do, I don't know. I don't know how applicable it would be. But really we're
Yeah.
just learning from each other. And so most people that I learn from, they learn from somebody else, and I'm helping other people get started, so it has to be collaborative. It's just how we operate, and it's a small space, so you'll run into these people again. So
Yeah. If we do. It
So
is a small world.
help.
Protect your reputation with integrity in this business. That is the truth right there. So,
Yeah.
Amanda, I appreciate you sharing your experiences and your story because I think this episode, maybe of any episode that we've ever done, because I've talked to limited partners on this show before who are like, I don't want to invest in my own stuff and kind of their story. But for you kind of sharing your journey from
Mm,
one to the other and then back again, I mean, and just really painting a realistic picture of, but also a hopeful picture and the joy that you have in what you're doing. This episode
mm.
definitely, I think, peeled back the curtains on what this life is like on both sides and will help the listener figure out like, okay, which path do I want to take? So thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing your story with us. How can our listener get a hold of you after the show? And I ask this question to everybody. Some people have told me it's their favorite part of the show. Why should people reach out to you after the show?
Yeah, so just go to my website, so AMAX equity.com, and you can sign up for the investor club. For limited partners who are getting started, there's a guide, I think it's 25 questions to ask or 5 questions to ask for limited partners. Just kind of what to look for in a deal if they're getting pitched a deal or see an investment opportunity, what to ask, and it'll help start the conversation. If nothing else, start the conversation with the GP. So you can get that there. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn, just Amanda Larson, or shoot me an email. It's Amanda at xequity.com.
And then what type of person would you love to talk to after the show?
People who just are looking for other opportunities, they kind of feel like they should be doing something, but maybe want to do something more than the stock market. Maybe they don't want to be a landlord like myself. I thought that was the only way into real estate, and it's simply not. And people who just want to get to know the opportunities and how it can change your life investing in real estate.
Yes. Awesome. All right. Thank you so much for coming on. Check the show notes or the YouTube description to get in touch with Amanda. And again, I always say this show, podcasting, all this, the thought leadership platform that we were talking about
Yeah.
earlier, it's a way to connect you with us. Take advantage of the free call, take advantage of the free stuff. And don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of being sold. Right. I think that's one thing
Yeah.
that a lot of people they're like, "Oh, she's gonna start bugging me all the time, or I'm gonna have to have
Mhm.
awkward questions and be like, no, I don't really want to invest." It's okay. Just say, we always say, like, if you don't want to be in our database or our network, like just say so. No hard feelings, right? So
Yeah.
don't let awkwardness or that shyness prevent you from reaching out and getting into our ecosystems. Your life will change if you
Yeah.
really get into it. And if you decide it's not for you, just say, this is not for me, and everybody's cool.
But you gotta take that first step. You gotta just take the
Yep.
first step. And there's no I'm sure I asked whatever questions I asked, and there's everyone's on their own learning journey, so going from wherever you are, happy to have a conversation.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's all this whole thing. Like I said, you cannot escape the conversations and the relationships on the phone or meeting in person. It's for us, but also for the investor. It's part of it. So be sure to reach out to me at investwithemma.com. It's just straight to my calendar and you can talk about whatever you want. You want to be an active investor? We got a free club that meets on Monday nights. You want to be passive? We've got a fund we can point you in the right direction. We can introduce you to who you need to be introduced to. And if you're an active investor who is raising capital, let me know. We got your pitch deck covered at highrise.group. And I will touch base with you all later on another episode next week. I really am looking forward to hearing from you about your next passive income adventure.